Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Amanda, and we're your hosts. And today we're going to be talking about driving across Australia in a van.
Actually driving up Australia.
Yeah, driving the eastern coast of Australia, I guess is more accurate. We didn't drive across the middle of it. That's all desert. That would have been cool, though. Make for a good show, right?
No, that would have been terribly boring.
Okay.
So we went to Australia after traveling Europe and Southeast Asia. We didn't have a plan to rent a van and drive up the coast like right from the start. It was kind of something that we eventually settled on like just before we went to Australia. What was some of the decision-making points in why we decided to rent a van over busing or just like finding a place and staying somewhere?
Or another option that people do is like buy a vehicle as well. I think after doing a lot of bus travel in Southeast Asia, I think that kind of made us decide on renting our own vehicle. I mean, there's definitely pros and cons to having your own vehicle, but one of the biggest things is that you can kind of travel at your leisure. And after being so structured for 4.5 months between trains in Europe and buses in Southeast Asia, I think we just wanted that freedom, or at least for me, I think that was a big driving force.
And for me, the initial like picture in my mind I had of what we would do in Australia was kind of settle in somewhere that was like, because we had been moving around so much in Europe and then in Asia as well, I kind of pictured us like getting an apartment for a month or
like
finding somewhere we can stay and then like maybe move from there and go see some other places. The first time, and I didn't really know how things worked for backpackers in Australia usually, but then we met a friend when we were in Europe, and she was telling us about how you can rent a van. It's pretty cheap and affordable, and pick it at one place, drop it off another place, and that's what a lot of people are doing there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think once we got to Australia, we started looking more in depth at the options for us. And it was pretty comparable in price, or it seemed pretty comparable in price to what would it cost us to bus all the way up from Melbourne up to Cairns. So,
yeah. So the benefit of having a camper van is that you get transportation and accommodation mixed together. It's by no means cheap in the camper van, but if you consider a price of bus plus the price of hostels, which hostels are quite expensive in Australia, then it becomes a bit more cost effective to be renting a van, especially for two people.
Yeah. And I mean, we met people who were even more people, like between groups of like 3, 4, 5, because you can get bigger options in the van. And when you're traveling in a pack of 5 and you're splitting your gas 5 ways and you're all sleeping in the same space, I mean, that really cuts down on your costs.
So for us, it seemed like it would be maybe a tiny bit cheaper to drive the van instead of busing and staying in hostels. A tiny bit, around the same price actually, but like just more freedom to do as we wanted, which is something we were looking for. But what else made you want to be driving up the East Coast instead of driving somewhere else or not driving anywhere?
Well, I think the East Coast was what was most well known to me, which was why it was the destination. We booked a flight to Melbourne. You had family there. So that seemed like, I guess, the most logical choice. And then to just go up the East Coast, that's kind of like the Gringo Trail of South America, but in Australia. I don't know what you'd call that in Australia, the Backpacker Trail. It seems like the most popular place to go when you've never been before. And then I think at that point I was just so ready to not have to deal with the logistics of booking our next hostel, figuring out our next form of transportation. Just having that freedom and ease was something that was really important to me coming around to that 4.5 month mark in Australia.
So you were feeling a bit tired of booking things because we had been doing it for like 4 months, and you figured if we had a car, we wouldn't have to book anything. You just like pay for gas and go where you want.
Yeah, I felt like it would be easier to just get up and explore where we were at and then decide, oh, we're done here, let's move on, as opposed to, booking a bus, being like, okay, we're in this town till 4:30. We leave at 4:30. We arrive whenever the bus gets there. And being really restricted by time frames with buses. We could just kind of come and go as we pleased and have a little bit more freedom with where we wanted to go when we wanted to go there.
Yeah, and I guess because we didn't really know exactly where we wanted to go right from the start.
Yeah, I think just having more of an open, less planned trip was sort of what I was seeking with Australia, because Southeast Asia and Europe had been really like go, go, go and very planned.
Yeah, and I guess that was, so I was leaning more to wanting to stay somewhere, and you were, I think, leaning more to seeing a bunch of places. And so like the van, we could kind of compromise a bit because it was allowed us to stay somewhere if we found somewhere that we wanted to stay.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was a good
instead
option
of having
for us.
Transportation booked all the time. So once we decided on the van, we started looking into companies, and there's quite a few different companies. I think the three most popular like backpacker options would be Wicked, Juicy, and Spaceships.
Yeah, and they all come in different colors. All the vans are brightly painted with different things that make them stick out as the branded van, which is a pretty cool concept. We looked at them all. Yeah, we looked at them all. I can't remember the exact process that we went through.
But the first one we heard about was Wicked. People have been telling us about that. I think that's probably the most popular one. And neither of us know how to drive a Standard,
right?
Which is a problem. Because Wicked vans, I think they have a couple. Wicked vans is like the nice Wicked vans are like, I think, the low end of Spaceships and Juicy. So you can get like really like quite a bit cheaper with Wicked vans and quite a bit more dangerous, I guess, apparently. But that was a problem because neither of us knew how to drive Standard. So we ended up looking at Juicy because someone we had met recommended it to us as well. Mm-hmm. I don't remember considering Spaceships too much or why we chose Juicy over Spaceship, but
yeah, I don't remember considering Spaceships. I think we'd heard about Juicy, so it was already credible in our minds. It was a good price. We were able to get the van on the day we wanted. It was all a very smooth process in terms of like picking up our van and getting on the road with it.
Yeah, it was almost surprising how easy the process was. I think we went into the Juicy office, which was in like downtown Melbourne. Not quite downtown, but like...
I think it was like a hip suburb of downtown.
The edge of downtown. And then we walk into the office. Did we book ahead? I think we had online.
Yeah, we had booked ahead. We'd booked an appointment and stuff to pick it up.
So we go in. I think he scans my driver's license, takes my credit card. We go look at the van. He shows us around. I guess you do like an inspection to make sure the van you're getting is like good quality, but like we didn't do it that well. And then gives you the keys and says, okay, have a good day.
It's like, have a good trip. See you never.
Yeah. So we hop in the van. And never in my life have I driven in a car with the driver on the right side. So I started the car. I'm like, oh, this is weird. It was nice because I had actually driven the same type of van when I was in high school. It was like a Toyota Previa, which is a weird van if you've never seen it. Like the one company's called Spaceships because the Previas look like spaceships. But when we hop in the van, I think get it out of the parking lot, first thing you do is you turn on the windshield wipers instead of the signal lights because those are on the different sides. And then, head out into traffic in like downtown Melbourne. And we're like, this would have been nice if we knew some
like traffic rules or like anything about driving on the opposite side. And it's weird too, even as the passenger, like getting in on the left-hand side. And I'm sitting there just like, oh my God, like I'm going to die. Like that was the thought. I was like, I'm going to die right now. Like this is the end of my life.
Yeah. And it's funny, like we did it countless number of times where one of us would be driving and the other one would be the passenger. And as we walk up to the car, we like end up on the wrong sides of the car. And also a problem that happened a couple times. I think you almost drove in the wrong way into a roundabout a couple times.
or shoulder checking the wrong way. I'm like shoulder checking. I'm like, oh, there's nobody coming. And then I go to drive and Ryan's like, what are you doing? Like there's cars. And I'm like, oh, whoops.
Yeah. And then also making turns, like in Canada, or at least here in Alberta, you can turn right on a red light. So we pull up to our first red light and we're like, can we turn left at this red light? I don't know.
I think we did it for the first like 2 days, and then we met up with friends from our Kentucky tour in Greece who are Australian, and they're like, no, you definitely can't. That's illegal. Like, oh, whoops. At least we're in this bright green van. People know that we're tourists. Probably back off a little.
Yeah, so we stayed one more night in Melbourne and then headed out on the road. We had booked our van with pickup in Melbourne and drop off in Cairns. So we had like 5 weeks or something.
Yeah, I think 5 weeks to get up the coast, which is a decent amount of time. I mean, you could definitely take a lot longer. We did have a bit of a time constraint near the end because we took our time, but I think it's a good amount of time. So our first stop after Melbourne was in tiny little town of Merimbula, which is between Melbourne and Sydney, pretty much directly halfway.
Yeah, and that's one of the nice things about having a van is you can go places that aren't necessarily on the tourist trail. Because we had been traveling in Europe and in Asia, we had met quite a few Australians. So going to Australia, we had planned to meet up with a bunch of them, and they where we had met people who lived all the way up the coast in different cities. So we met with someone in Melbourne, in Merimbula, in Sydney.
Canberra, which...
Yeah.
For those Canadians out there, looks like Canberra, but the Aussies pronounce it Canberra. We met up with a friend there. It was cool because from Sydney, we were able to take a drive into the Blue Mountains for a few days, which is a little bit off of that main tourist trail, but definitely completely worth it.
Yeah, and so logistics-wise, okay, just avoided a sneeze. Maybe it's coming again. Logistics-wise, you can stay. There's a couple places you could stay. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Do you want to get your sneeze under control? It's pretty cool because you can pretty much stay at like any roadside truck stop. And with the vans, they're basically set up so the back is like has bench seating, but then you can fold it out to make a bed, and your bags just are slipped right underneath of that bed area. And it's got a fan, and then the very back of it has like a little stove fridge sort of setup. So you do have like a basic camping setup essentially in your van. So you can stop at roadside stops for free, or you can pay for like a campsite, and then you've got access to showers and whatnot.
Yeah, because there's a lot of roadside stops. Is that what the word is? Rest stops. There's a lot of rest stops on the road, and we had purchased like an Australian Automobile Association book that would show you which rest stops you're allowed to stay at overnight and which ones you're not. I think that you're usually fine staying at the ones you're not supposed to stay at overnight.
Yeah,
Doesn't seem like there's a lot of people checking, but
I think the worst they would do is knock on the windows and ask you to not sleep there. I think that's the worst that would happen to you.
And it's hard like the vans are very apparent that they're camper vans. I think our van was lime green with like purple trim and a gigantic Juicy logo on the side. So you're not going to be able to like park in parking lots and pretend you're not camping there.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So we stayed at a couple friends' houses, rest stops, campgrounds. And then also there's a hostel chain in Australia called Nomads Hostels. And they have a deal with Juicy where you can park your van there for $5 a night and then use all the hostel facilities.
Yeah, and that's definitely a really cool option. For our first little bit, we were really trying to, I guess, like optimize our money saving with the van. So we stayed at a few rest stops, and then getting into Sydney, there wasn't a Nomads hostel where we could park at. So we ended up staying at a campsite, and it was pretty expensive as well as outside of the city. And I loved Sydney. I think it's such a cool city to be a tourist in because there's so much to see. But it definitely wasn't the ideal city for having a van in because the traffic's crazy. There's a bunch of toll roads. I have no idea how you're supposed to pay for those to this day. And it's just to stay there with our van, we did have to stay a bit out of the city, and then we had to pay to train in every day.
Yeah, so that'd be a good place to talk about downsides of the camper van. Definitely cities aren't the best place to be. Like, I think a camper van gives you a lot of benefits in going to smaller places that you wouldn't go to if you were busing. Small towns where you can park lots of places and have to travel longer distances to go to see stuff. But when you're in the city, there's public transportation and there's nowhere to really camp anywhere close to the city.
Or to park.
Yeah. So in Sydney, we ended up paying for our camping site what we could have paid to stay in a hostel.
Yeah, that was definitely not a money saver or a time saver in any sort of way. I think Sydney was definitely not a great city to be in with a camper van. I mean, it was nice because we could get to the beaches, I guess, a little bit easier because we had that camper van. But then in saying that, the city is so equipped for people to get around really easily without a vehicle. So I think it wasn't the best city. But then it was nice because we were able to take some stops on the way up. I think we stopped at, where did we stop? Port Macquarie?
Yeah. But just to touch on like another downside of the camper van is that usually, like, so in Australia, if you're going, you're probably going to take a Whitsundays trip, maybe take like a scuba diving trip on the Great Barrier Reef. Maybe you want to go to like Uluru. I'm surprised I remembered that.
Ayers Rock.
So if you average it out per night, and between what you'd pay in a hostel and paying a van, you think, oh, maybe this van's a bit cheaper because I've got accommodation every night. But then if you want to go on like a Whitsundays trip or a scuba diving trip, you've got to pay for that as well as you're still paying for your accommodation because you've got that van sitting around not being used.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe you could rent it out on Airbnb now that that's a thing.
I don't know if you can do that or not.
I don't think you can.
I don't think you can. But we did a Fraser Island trip as well.
Great.
And Whitsundays. Fortunately, we dropped our van off before we went on our Great Barrier Reef diving trip. But so I think we would have had like 5 or so nights between Whitsundays and Fraser Island where we didn't sleep in our van, but we'd paid for it. So it is definitely something to consider when you are thinking about what you want to do if you're going to be in Australia. And
another thing about driving a van in Australia is there are a bunch of speed. I was going to say there's a bunch of speed fascists or something. There's like photo radar everywhere. And not only that, like there is these timed highway sections where you take a picture of you at one end and take a picture of you at the other end and then average your speed in between so that you like actually can't speed.
Yeah, it's interesting too because it'll be in places where there's basically no shoulder to the road, so you can't pull over, and it's like areas where you're just driving. Like there isn't exits to towns. There's nowhere to stop. So it's like you're literally just driving, and it's kind of the highway stretches that I would love to just cruise on. You have to be really cautious of your speed so you don't get a ticket. And
then there's like safety camera. I remember there's like roadside photo safety check things.
Oh yeah, we always used to make faces at them when we
take the hands off the wheel. So there's that, and there's like aerial speed traps as well. So there's a lot of possibilities to get a ticket, which jacks up the price of your trip if you do get those. Unless, like, what happened to us is
we got a toll ticket in
so
Sydney.
The car's registered to Juicy, so you don't get the ticket. Juicy gets a ticket, and then they transfer it over to you. So we got 2 emails from Juicy saying we've got tickets. So I went online to try to find out more information. Couldn't. I emailed Juicy and they're like, we don't have any information. You'll get the tickets in the mail. And then we tried to pay them while we were in Australia.
Like I called like 3 or 4 times.
Because I think we had a toll ticket from Sydney and a speeding ticket from somewhere else. And then they never showed up in the mail in Canada. So
we'll keep you posted for the next time we go to Oz.
Yeah, we might get
in and
fined 6 million Australian dollars because of all these interest charges.
Yeah. Can you imagine? That would be awful.
Yeah. So just having a car exposes you to risk. And speeding tickets, maybe if you get in an accident and you're not properly insured.
I think though Juicy did for us. Like they offered us insurance packages that we took on. The companies will insure you if you choose to do that. I mean, you don't have to. It does cost you a little bit extra to get that insurance, but I think it's definitely worth that cost to have it just in case something does happen.
Mm.
I mean, you never know, like even having somebody break into the van because your stuff is there. It's pretty interesting though. Like I'd never stayed at a roadside truck stop like ever in my life. I would have done that. It's definitely a neat experience. I think that having those experiences definitely made driving worth it for me.
Yeah, and some interesting experiences as well.
Yeah, there was one, I mean, I'm skipping ahead a little bit in our destinations, but there was one up near, it's in Queensland, I think. So up between Byron Bay and Surfers Paradise that we stayed. And we got out and there was all these cane toads everywhere. And for those of you who don't know what cane toads are, they're these massive, massive toads. Like they're huge and they're really, really hard to kill. They have a thing where like if they get hit by a car, if somebody's like attacking them, they spit out their guts to protect themselves and then they'll look dead and then they'll like swallow their guts back in again and keep hopping along, which is totally disgusting. But so we arrive at this truck stop and there's just cane toads everywhere. So Ryan avoids the bathroom and just goes and pees outside. And I'm like, damn it, I really need to like sit down. Like I have to actually use a toilet. I don't want to just like squat outside of this truck stop restroom when there's trucks everywhere full of people. And it's just like cane toads are just hopping around, ribbiting at me the whole time I'm trying to use the bathroom in peace. They're so gross. I just remember that as like one of the like, I can't believe I'm doing this moments.
Yeah, because it's more like rest stop than truck stop. So it's kind of like, there's like usually a couple other people camping. But yeah, I remember that night going to the washroom with a flashlight and you look in like the floor, every probably like 6 inches, there's a toad. So like you can't avoid them. You'd have to like move them out of the way. And like there's actually enough of them that if they were like teaming up, they could probably kill you.
Yeah, 100%. They're so gross. I remember trying to get a photo, but because it was dark, I couldn't get it. It was just all their like shiny little eyes, which was just creepy.
Yeah, so what were some of the highlights for you of our camper van trip?
The Big Banana in Coffs Harbour, number one for me. I'm kidding. Ryan hated the Big Banana in Coffs Harbour. I thought it was cool. Highlights of the actual driving or of the trip in Australia?
Just both.
I mean, the Whitsundays was definitely a highlight for me in terms of things that we saw. I think, what is that main beach called? I can't remember. It's got like some of the whitest, finest sand in the world. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever laid eyes on. I think Byron Bay was really cool. Byron Bay kind of had the best of both worlds for us because we stayed at a Nomads. So we paid a really cheap price to stay in our van, but then we got to use their kitchen and their showers, and we were able to meet a lot of really cool people at the hostel. So I feel like we got the social aspect while still staying in the van, which was awesome. What else? What are some for you?
So I definitely enjoyed like the being able to stay at the Nomads hostels and pay $5 and get like your hostel as well as your van was really sweet. Because the van does have like a little stove, but it's kind of shitty, and especially if it's windy out, it like has no heat.
Yeah.
So I remember trying to eat, like I ate like quite a bit of kangaroo when we were there because it's cheap and quite like healthy. And like trying to cook kangaroo on the stove in our van, and it just like will not heat up.
Oh man, one of my worst memories from that was there was one night where we were at a rest stop and our stove was just not working. It was too windy. We tried, I think, almost everything we could. And then I think we just ate like canned beans cold. And for me, food is such a like, I really like to eat good food and really enjoy meals. And I just remember feeling so upset that I was eating such a crappy meal and just was like, oh, I just wish that this was cooked right now. But such a good learning experience that you really don't need a fancy meal to be having a cool experience or a good time, because food is so much about what makes traveling exciting for me is trying new food.
Yeah. And one of the things about driving, like there's quite a few roads that are like I don't know, mentioned as like, oh, you should go drive this road. It's like a cool experience driving it. And part of the problem for me is I usually get like too fixated on like the destination and don't really enjoy the trip. So like a lot of times we did that a few times where we took like the scenic route.
Yeah.
And I end up just like, oh, I just want to be there. Cause like driving I wasn't able to enjoy the scenery driving.
Yeah, I completely get that. I think too, there was one time where we decided to take, what was it called, like the Kangaroo Trail or something, or Kangaroo Waterfall. You go see these waterfalls. I remember we drove like 2 hours out of our way, and it was foggy and pissed rain the entire time we were driving. And I remember just feeling so discouraged and just frustrated. It was just like, why did we take this extra route for this to be so crappy? And yeah, again, same as you, really focused on where we were going instead of just like laughing at the hilarity of that moment and how it's like, you know, you can't control everything in your life. I feel like that was just like letting go of control and just like focusing on what could be amazing out of that moment instead of like, oh, the weather ruined this day for me. Yeah.
And one of the interesting places that we went because we were driving that we probably wouldn't have gone if we weren't driving was a little town called Nimbin right outside of Byron Bay, which actually it's popular for people to do tours from
Byron Bay for the day.
Yeah.
Nimbin, a little hippie town. Everyone there is selling weed cookies. There's like a weird museum.
Yeah, it's funny because
like, I don't
the
even
moment,
know what else
like
to say about it.
I guess it's like a cultural marijuana area where they're like kind of the rules don't really apply in regards to marijuana in Nimbin. It seems like that's kind of the reason people go there is because there's like weed everywhere. So you get out of your van and like 10 seconds later, someone's offering to sell you.
Like young, old, like everyone is just like weed cookies, weed, pot, joints, weed cookies, weed brownies, weed muffins, anything with weed in it. I got you.
Yeah, so it was a fun,
it's just like crazy. It's everywhere.
Unique experience.
Yeah, for sure. And they sell a whole bunch of hemp products, which is pretty cool. I just thought of another one of the highlights from the trip for me, the Australia Zoo. I loved the Australia Zoo, and I felt like having a van made it a lot more accessible for us to get to and from the Australia Zoo because we were able to just like go and continue driving.
Yeah, because it's in the middle of nowhere. Or it's not in the middle of nowhere. It's not. It's not in a big city. So I think you will leave from Brisbane.
Yeah,
and it's a couple hours away.
Is it Brisbane or Surfers? In between Surfers and Brisbane?
I don't remember.
It's somewhere in Queensland. Somewhere in the state of Queensland, Australia, is Australia Zoo. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't even know how you get there if you're not driving or if you don't ever ride. And I feel sort of the same way about when you're in Surfers Paradise, there's a bunch of amusement parks. And I think, you know, taking the bus would have been definitely an option, but I think it was a lot easier because we just had our van and it was really easy for us to get to and from there.
Yeah. So if you were if you were going to Australia again, would you rent a camper van again? Would you?
Yeah, I think I would. I actually really loved the experience. And I think one thing I know I wrote in my journal and I've thought about since then is I always had this idea in my head that I wasn't somebody who could live out of a van for 5 weeks, which I know is completely ridiculous because you can be anybody you want. But I think just based on, I guess, like my past experiences in my life and who other people had made me out to be, I was just like, felt like it was such a big step for me to do that, to be like, oh yeah, I lived out of a van for 5 weeks. And I actually loved it so much. It was really nice not having to carry my backpack. That was one of the huge things for me because my backpack was heavy and it hurt my back and I'd get sweaty carrying it, especially through Southeast Asia. And it was nice to just put it down. And I did love having the freedom to just explore. So I think I would do it again. Would you?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to have a little bit of a nicer vehicle.
You didn't like Bean. That's what we named our van.
The problem, like the refrigerator stopped working at one point. There was just like this tiny little fan that didn't to keep us particularly cool. the van pulled to one side. So it would be nice if there was a bit more functionality, but like it was like you said, it was really cool getting used to living in a van, because you realize you don't really need much to live and be happy.
100%. Like you really don't need a lot of stuff. I think, having a fridge that was a bit more reliable, so that we could buy groceries comfortably and not be worried about like, oh, well, our fridge might not work, so this is going to go bad in 2 days. Like, do we spend money on this? And then maybe having a different setup in terms of the stove. I would have really liked to be able to rely on those things.
Yeah. But yeah, overall, like a very good experience. And I definitely recommend that people going. I know like it's common for people to buy cars, and then there's also a bus called the Oz Experience, which is like, if you listen to our New Zealand episode, like a hop on, hop off bus similar to the Kiwi Experience or Stray, where you can go, and it's kind of like an in-between of, you have like these pre-planned routes, or the pre-planned route, and then you can stay as long as you want in each city, but obviously not as flexible as driving, but maybe a better price.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's a good option, but I definitely drive again.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of cool too, like coming home after we'd spent 2 weeks in Thailand, which is, they drive on the left-hand side of the road. Then we drove through Australia for 5 weeks. Then we went to New Zealand for 3, which is also on the left-hand side. And I came home and I remember getting in my own car. It was actually weird for me to be driving on the right-hand side of the road. And then I found myself flipping my windshield wipers because I was so used to driving the other way, which it was interesting to me how after practicing it, it just became really natural to do something that was so different to me in the beginning.
Yeah, but it's weird because it's exactly the same but backwards. But you
same but different.
You get like your driving skills are like the same. You just have to realize that you're doing everything slightly differently. So it's like after like 3-4 hours, it's like, okay, this is how you do it. And it's weird to think about not doing it that way after a while too.
Yeah.
So I had the same thing when I first got back in my car in Canada. One of my first days driving, I was pulled up to a stop sign, and then I think I turned right. And turned, instead of just turning into the right lane, I went and made like into the left lane. I was like, oh shit, I'm driving down the wrong side of the road. That's not good.
Yeah, it's funny though. Funny because you're fine. It's one other thing I wanted to say about driving in a van is it's actually a pretty decent thing to do if you are traveling as a couple. I think because hostels in Australia are expensive if you want to have a private room or to have more space. So it was nice to have that van so that, it was kind of like having our own room and having our own space, which was nice after staying in a lot of dorm rooms, just because, after a while you just want some space.
Yeah. And if you are planning on going and doing the van trip, I'd maybe say, like, if we were doing our same route, like Melbourne to Cairns again, maybe it would have made more sense to pick up the van in Sydney and just deal with the Melbourne to Sydney part on our own, like busing or something.
That's actually a really, really good idea, because I think that we spent more money in Sydney having the van all in all than we would have if we would have just stayed at a hostel. And I think our experience in Sydney would have been better had we been in a hostel and not at a campsite on the outskirts of downtown. So I think that's definitely a good call. I think it would be really cool going Melbourne west and doing like the Great Ocean Road, having a van and being able to like camp and stay overnight and that sort of thing. Or even doing up to Uluru. I think that would be really cool too. Mm-hmm. All the way to Darwin in a van, get a good fan, pay for one with AC. Just me?
Just maybe. I don't know.
I would have liked air conditioning.
So we'll put links to all the companies we mentioned in the show notes. Maybe an itinerary.
Maybe, if you're lucky.
And those are theworldwanderers.com.
Are you serious? www.theworldwanderers.com. Send us an email if you have any questions, comments at theworldwandererspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.